Hi guys, so Alex Phillips, former MEP for Nigel Farage's Brexit party and now member of staff for GB News, is here to tell us about how Brexit has been a success, but has also somewhat failed. Not failed because of Brexit, but because of the likes of Boris Johnson not implementing it correctly, or how evil counter-revolutionaries are trying to undermine the great project at every turn. For people who have won, Brexiteers sure haven't gotten over it. Anyway, let's hear about some of the costs and benefits of Brexit.
Well, it was the battle that broke Britain. Who could have anticipated a referendum on whether or not to remain part of a trading bloc could elicit such passion, such anger, resentment, tribalism, bitterness, division and hatred? Yeah, at times pure, unbridled hatred, I should know.
Yes, you should know, because it was your boss who was pouring poison into people's minds, into people's ears for years. Somebody who weaponized the issue of immigration in order to convince ordinary working class people that their greatest enemy, their greatest threat was other working class people coming from abroad. Yes, I understand what you're talking about here, Alex.
Yes, there were vested interests at stake. Big business had spent the best part of half a century dealing with a one-stop shop in Brussels, where a corporate cartel could rewrite continental-wide laws to serve their interests.
What is she talking about here? A corporate cartel? She was a member of the European Parliament. She was elected through proportional representation in Britain to represent a constituency. Along with Nigel Farage, I might add. These people were democratically elected. They served a session in Parliament, and they're talking about a corporate cartel. What the hell is she talking about here?
Having the rug pulled from underneath them was unprecedented. And boy, did they let us know they weren't happy. Meanwhile, citizens, the vast majority of whom had never lived a single day outside the EU.
What are you talking about? I presume she's talking about here people who haven't lived a day outside Britain, because she's going to get on to freedom of movement and how freedom of movement ended. And, you know, most people who had never traveled abroad were saying, oh, why are you taking away our freedom of movement? Yes, freedom of movement was taken away from people who could have benefited from it. It was sold as, it's going to stop just the foreigners. We're going to still have our cake and eat it. We're still going to be able to travel abroad, you know, because we're British. You know, the French, the Germans, they want us. They want our money. Of course, they're going to open their borders to us while we can close our borders to them. And it was sold as that.
Were warned of everything they were set to lose. The sense that a generation whose rights, privileges and accesses were being stolen by a belligerent underclass or arrogant politicians was palpable.
And true. Of course it was true. They were sold a lie. The older generation were told, you need to vote to stop all these foreigners from coming in. We need to end freedom of movement. Don't worry, your children will still be able to travel abroad or whatever. Don't worry about that. That's going to remain. And it was a lie. And you haven't turned around and said, yes, we're sorry for lying about that.
Actual tears were wept as headlines spoke of catastrophic economic outcomes, blocks on travel, the end of study abroad programmes, massive roaming charges, the end of cheaper foreign workers, French wine, Dutch cheese, human rights, kids being sent up chimneys, super STIs spreading across the land, racists running riot. The warnings only just stopped short of the sky falling in and imminent nuclear apocalypse.
Is that an attempt at comedy? Because you're actually pointing out things that happened. Roaming charges have returned. This was actually recorded on the 30th of August, 2021, not the 30th of August, 2016. So we've seen how supermarket shelves are empty. We've seen how very serious issues such as blood test rationing taking place because the NHS don't have access to sufficient resources. And this is okay for you? Because somebody hadn't mentioned an atomic war or the sky falling in? This is perfectly fine?
Well, that hasn't really happened, has it?
apart from the atomic war and the sky falling to the ground, no, these other things have happened, yes.
Or has it? Perhaps the pandemic came at just the right time to mask major issues. A year when industry ground to a halt, when nobody could travel and borders were slammed shut, when across the world migrant workers fled for their homelands and governments had to spend trillions bankrolling stuttering businesses. If these were to be the symptoms of Brexit, perhaps it helps that they were also the symptoms of worldwide lockdown.
But some of these issues are not affecting EU countries. EU countries are not seeing supermarkets' shelves empty. So you can't blame everything on the pandemic. You have to blame some of it on Brexit. You can hide, yes, and Brexit has been hidden by the pandemic, the effects of Brexit, but not completely, and you can't get away from that.
Yet, perhaps begrudgingly, the mainstream media are now writing some success stories. A world-leading vaccine rollout this side of the channel as the EU hardly showered themselves in glory with pushiness, protectionism, prickliness and petulance.
What the hell? Who writes this script? Anyway, this is once again, this was recorded on the 30th of August this year, not the 1st of January. Does she not realize that, and I have to reiterate this once again, it was not a race. Brexiteers turned it into a race, saying, yes, we're number one, Europe is far behind. Well, many European countries have overtaken Britain in the rollout of the vaccine. Now, many Brexiteers have gone very quiet about that, of course, because they can't use it as a stick to beat Ramoners or the EU with. And as I've said before, it's not a race. These people regard it as a race, and she's still using it as a race, and we're winning the race, even though you're not.
Double the number of students enrolling on university exchange programmes despite the pandemic, as the UK's new global Turing scheme replaces the EU's Erasmus one, adding Anglophone institutions across the world, taking the number of possible countries from 37 to 150.
And of course she leaves out some very important information, that this is designed for the rich. This is for the elite. Once again, wasn't Brexit supposed to be for the working class? Wasn't it for the poor men and women on the street? No, it's for the elite. The Turing system, Turing project, whatever it is, it's much more expensive to access. It's not for everyone. Erasmus was for everyone. This new system is not. Yes, there are more countries added, it seems, but it's just taking the richer people from these countries. It's not open to all. It's not a benefit, really.
Massive injections of taxpayer cash incentivising the car industry to meet 21st century demands with electric battery megafactories.
Let's hear what you said again about this.
Phone institutions across the world, taking the number of possible countries from 37 to 150. Massive injections of taxpayer cash.
Massive injections of taxpayer cash. Remember that.
Incentivising the car industry to meet 21st century demands with electric battery megafactories.
So, you're taking taxpayer money and giving it to private companies. Yes, we've seen that with PPE contracts, but how is that a benefit of Brexit?
Having been told it would all but collapse once just-in-time supply chains were disrupted.
So you're saying that because a certain industry hasn't collapsed, that's okay. Yeah, but because we bribed them to stay here. Nissan, for example, was pretty much bribed to stay in Britain. They were talking about back in 2016 that there's a risk to them staying in Britain. And it turns out, wow, look, we've given them a load of money to build battery factories here. Now, I'm completely supportive of electric vehicles, and I'm fully supportive of giving money to these companies if this is going to have a benefit for the country, and I think it is. But this is not a benefit of Brexit. You're taking taxpayer money and giving it to a company to do something. How is that a benefit of Brexit? Wasn't Brexit supposed to pay for itself?
Academic collaboration on an entirely new, unparalleled level, as grants are made available to leading scientists from every corner of the globe to pursue high-risk, high-reward innovations free from EU red tape.
Doesn't she realize, well, of course she doesn't realise, or she's pretending not to realise, that the UK is still part of many European projects. For example, Euratom, which is the European research organisation for atomic energy. That's just one. There are a number of different agencies that the UK is still part of. They're still paying into, and they're still getting money back in funding for research. And then let's go back to the vaccine. Wasn't it the AstraZeneca vaccine production or development was partly funded by Oxford University, which was partly funded by the European Union?
Putting the UK at the forefront of experimentation, when we were told we'd become but a blip on the academic horizon. No equivalence with the EU and financial markets threatening to drive thousands away from the City of London into the open arms of a, well, mediocre financial services sector, hungrily awaiting in Frankfurt. Yet the reverse is starting to happen as the UK positions itself ready to pip Wall Street to the top of the global pile.
Look, I've talked about this before. It's not just jobs that are going from out of the City of London, but it's also capital, money that's no longer available for the exchequer. But let's park that for a moment. Wasn't Brexit about ordinary people? How is London, beating New York a benefit for ordinary people on the street? It's a benefit for people who invest in the city, probably. But how is it a benefit for the average person on the street, the average man or woman who's on universal credit, or who's struggling, who was told you need to vote for Brexit because it's going to make your life better?
But apart from some beautiful baubles for the government to hang on the root and branch reform of self-determination the referendum promised, other issues have perhaps been hidden from view, or clumsily kicked into the long grass with ramifications in train. We never really took back control of our waters, an oft-made pledge by sou'wester-donning MPs who haven't dared set foot in a seaside town since.
Isn't it ironic that she's criticising MPs for not going to visit seaside towns when her own boss, former boss I should say, Nigel Farage, is not going anywhere near a seaside town? Before the referendum and after the referendum, just before Brexit really came into force, he was visiting these seaside towns, visiting these fishing communities, telling them everything is going to be great. You need to vote for Brexit. You're going to have your freedom back. You're going to be able to sell as much fish wherever you want. Everything is going to be fantastic. And now he doesn't even go near the place. Isn't that strange? What about Alex here? Is she going to go and visit these fishermen and explain to them why Brexit is why they're suffering the consequences of Brexit? Or is she just going to stay in her studio?
There are supply chain shortages, with migrant workers flocking back to their home countries at the start of lockdown and never returning.
Yes, the supply chain shortages are because of the pandemic, not because of Brexit. So surely other countries that are suffering the consequences of pandemic are seeing supermarket shelves being empty. Well, no, that's not the case. So you can't blame this on the pandemic. You have to blame this on Brexit. But she won't do that.
The lowest paid jobs are now having to put up salaries to eye-watering levels simply to attract the domestic workforce. A good thing if you're a worker, but perhaps bad news for employers, depending which way you look at the situation.
So maybe she's been honest here. Brexit is not all it's cracked up to be.
The tatters of a brutal blackmail over Northern Ireland as Boris's oven-ready deal turned out to contain all of the unhealthy ingredients and EU donkey meat he had vociferously opposed under his predecessor, Theresa May.
What the hell is she talking about here? She said words, but I don't understand what she's talking about. What part of the Northern Ireland Protocol does she have a problem with? What part of Boris Johnson's deal when it comes to Northern Ireland does she have a problem with?
Brushed under the carpet to manage at some point in the future, leaving the UK vulnerable to a mercurial EU's demands under their cynically strategic sword of Damocles. For some, our regulatory orbit around Brussels is still too close, with an unbroken umbilical cord stretching across the channel that could easily be used to drag us back in.
And here we have it. The fear. This is what the Brexiteers continually push. The fear that we could be pulled back into the European Union. That the European Union are desperate to get Britain back in. I'm sorry, Alex, it's no longer the case. You may think that, but it's not true. The EU did want Britain at the beginning of this saga. They would have preferred Britain to stay as a member of the European Union, but you've decided to go. And if you look around Europe, not many people are talking about Brexit. You people, Brexiteers, are banging on about it all the time, but the average person in Europe doesn't give a crap about Brexit. And unfortunately, I have to say this, their care for Britain is diminishing. They're giving less of a crap about Britain too. They're looking across the pond and they see Boris Johnson and the likes of Alex Phillips banging on about how everything is great and how the EU is collapsing. And they scratch their heads because they say, what is wrong with these people?
The tabula rasa created by taking back control remains largely blank, other than a few optimistic scrawlings.
Taking back control of what? You said we had to take back control of our borders. And you always had control of your borders. We have to take back control of our money. You don't have the euro. We have to take back control of our laws. You weren't actually able to present any examples of laws that you don't have control over. So what did you take back control of? Please give us some examples.
The rest of our independent future still to write. No parliament can bind its successor, and there are plenty of authors out there jostling to grab hold of the newly freed tiller to navigate the good ship Great Britain across the uncharted waters of her own destiny.
Once again, words that I don't understand. Uncharted waters of her own destiny. What the hell does this mean?
Did we get what we voted for? Will we get what we want?
You got what you voted for. Well, actually, no. You didn't know what the hell you were voting for, so how did you get what you voted for? You sold the public a lie. You sold the public the idea that they could have their cake and they could eat it too. And that was not true. It was impossible. And you're trying to find reasons for the reason, you're trying to find reasons why it's bad and blame those reasons on everyone else, on people who told you that it would be a disaster. Blame it on the EU, blame it on everyone else but yourselves. And I'm talking here about Brexiteers, not Brexit voters, not people who voted for Brexit. I'm talking about Brexiteers like Alex Phillips and Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg. People who continually try to sell the idea that this was a success. And if there are any problems, it's down to the pandemic or it's down to people not believing in Brexit enough. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?